Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fearlessly Authentic. I'm your host, Jody Harrison Bauer, and I am so excited to share this episode with you today. We have a great guest today, Dr. Jenn Mann, who's going to help us get through the holidays with as little stress and anxiety as we can possibly have. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the show. This is the show that will help educate you, empower you, maybe entertain you a little bit, and inspire you to go live your most fearlessly authentic life. Because in my opinion, if we're not doing that, then what are we here for? So please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And you can now find this podcast on Amazon Music. So go there right now. Fearlessly Authentic is being featured. So before I introduce Dr. Jenn Mann, I would like to give you some information about her. Dr. Jenn Mann has been on the show a few times, and it's been a while since we have had her on. And I just thought this would be a great time to talk about how to relieve those stresses and anxiety. Dr. Jenn Mann is a well-known psychotherapist, author, television and radio show host. She is the host and therapist for VH1's long-standing hit shows Couples Therapy with Dr. Jenn and Family Therapy with Dr. Jenn. She has appeared as a guest expert on hundreds of shows, including The Today Show, The Early Show, Dr. Oz, Wendy Williams, The Doctors, The Maury Show, Steve Harvey, Access Hollywood, The Insider, and Jimmy Kimmel Live. Dr. Jenn hosts a widely popular call-in advice radio show. She is the author of two best-selling parenting books, Super Baby, 12 Ways to Give Your Child a Head Start in the First 3 Years, and the A to Z Guide to Raising Happy, Confident Kids. She is also the co-author of a children's book, Rockin' Babies, which she co-wrote with her mother, Grammy Award winner, songwriter Cynthia Weil. Her newest book is The Relationship Fix, Dr. Jenn's Guide to Improving Communication, Connection, and Intimacy. She is a licensed marriage, family, and child therapist and has been in private practice for almost 3 decades. She lives in Beverly Hills, California with her family. And to learn more about Dr. Jenn, visit drjenn.com or check out her Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat at Dr. Jenn Mann. That's 2 N's and 2 N's on both names. Very easy to remember. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jenn Mann. I'm so happy to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while since I feel like you've been like a friend of the show, and it's been a while.
Yeah.
Like a couple of years, I think already. Time just flies.
It sure does.
And our hair color keeps changing. And I love you as a
blonde.
blonde. I love you as a brunette. I mean, that's the nice thing. I could never go that color. I mean, you look great in it.
I'm a natural brunette, but then at the height of COVID, when we were all on lockdown, I couldn't get color. So I had to color from a box and was trying to get to my natural color, which was a disaster. It was like an orange brown, then it was a raspberry brown, it was pink brown. It was like every color of brown. It was a disaster, but I'm glad to be back to blonde, which is kind of where I've been since my 20s.
Yeah, no, it looks really pretty.
Thank you.
When we were talking about what to discuss today, because there are so many things that we can discuss, is that 'tis the season. It tends to be very stressful for everyone, especially, if there's been a death in the family or with friends. And this is a reminder, especially if they pass this time of year. For me, my mom passed away the day after my birthday. My birthday is December 27th. So, it brings up a lot of tough times, and you're still trying to be there for family and friends. The biggest question I have for you, because of these triggers, is how do we manage? I know that's a big question. I want to break it down, but how do we begin to even manage stress and anxiety during this time of year?
And when you say manage stress and anxiety, you mean overall, as opposed to after the death of a loved one?
Yes, overall, not specifically about a loved one passing.
Okay. Overall, there are a number of things that we can do. There was a book that came out a few years ago. I think it was Shonda Rhimes wrote this book, like The Year of Yes, and was like, say yes to everything. So you have all these new great opportunities. And I'm all for having adventures, but I also think sometimes it needs to be the year of no. And I think sometimes we need to make boundaries. We need to preserve our sacred space. We need to preserve our energy. We need to make sure that we have some level of self-care in the chaos of the holidays. And especially if you are someone like you or like me who has lost a parent or a loved one, it's especially important to be saying no. So I think that that's one thing, making boundaries and preserving that time. I think also making sure that you are not spending time with people who drain you. And I think sometimes the holidays are a good time to kind of reassess and say, okay, this is supposed to be a joyous time of the year. Who brings me joy and who doesn't? Who drains me? Who is exhausting to me? And be more selective about who you spend time with. I also think that when it comes time for family dinners, I think that there are some families where that is a great joy, where it is something that is really invigorating and gives you energy. And there are some families that are draining and difficult. And if you have a family that is draining and difficult, making boundaries. Maybe you come a little on the late side, you leave right after dessert, you make a lot of boundaries about what you're discussing, no politics, no, like whatever your list is of things that create conflict. And also you learn to make boundaries. If somebody tries to prod you to discuss something that is painful, difficult, triggering. I talk to a lot of single people around the holidays who say like, I'm so tired of being asked, when am I going to get married? Or like, why haven't I found someone? Like, come up with the pat answers for those questions that drive you crazy and learn how to change the subject as quickly as possible and make those boundaries.
Everything that you're saying seems to be something we should be practicing the whole year, but specifically it seems to come up with neon lights and bells and everything else during this time of year. Everything is exaggerated, right? Because we do feel, because of maybe society, that we do need to spend more time with friends, whether they are toxic or not. And I think creating those boundaries all year long are important, but especially now, if like you said, there are triggers. So,
and along those lines, I think that around the holidays, we get caught up in the shoulds. I should buy this present. I should spend time with this person. I should enjoy this family member. And I think, fuck the shoulds. I think we have to kind of reevaluate. Life is too short. And I think we really need to look at what brings us joy and really not get into what we're told we should do.
Isn't it interesting how society has put so much pressure on us? I talk about societal pressures at a certain age for women and how we shouldn't stay in that box that society wants us to be in. It's the same thing for that very courageous person who says, I know that I should spend time with my family, but it doesn't work for me. How does that person of any age say no and still maintain a decent relationship with that person without offending them?
Well, I think that there are a lot of different ways to do it, and it depends on the circumstances. Sometimes it's just postponing it. Sometimes it's saying like, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'm not going to be able to make it to the holiday dinner, but let's get together in the new year. Other times it's actually having the conversation and saying, look, the last time I had dinner with you, there was so much conflict and I'm not in a place to really revisit those conflicts. I love you. I care about you. But let's kind of take a little space and revisit each other in the new year and see where we're at. So I think that sometimes the best way to handle it is to postpone and to kind of kick the can.
That's hard sometimes. I mean, I'm thinking about, as you're talking, I'm thinking about situations that I used to have when I was younger, like 10 years ago, younger.
Yeah.
And I would still find myself doing the things that I thought I should be doing. And it's very hard because people, if you are that person that does all the shoulds and you suddenly decide to step in your power, be your fearlessly authentic person and say, I don't want to do this anymore. That change of that relationship with that person is shocking to them. And they
Mhm.
don't like it because they think, oh, well, Jody always comes to this. Well, no, Jody's saying, no, it's not good for my mental health this year.
Yeah.
That's what I find so hard.
Well, I have a girlfriend who got some therapy and decided to make boundaries. And when she started making boundaries with her friends, like you're saying, some people were like, what's going on? Like, why have you gotten so mean? Like, and then other people were like, oh, it's about time. I've been waiting for you to take better care of yourself. And she really looked at kind of, there was a very clear division. It was very black and white, where there was one camp that was like, why are you not meeting my needs? I don't know why you become such a bitch. And then the other camp that was like, oh, thank God, I'm so happy you're doing this. I've been wanting you to take better care of yourself. Those are the people who are still her friends. Those other people are no longer in her life. And I think that it's important to be assessing and figuring things out, because sometimes we do get caught up in the shoulds, especially as women, that like
Yeah.
we get very caught up in like, oh, I should be friends with my sister-in-law. Oh, I should be friends with this person I knew from elementary school. And, it's important to really look at who is on the same page as you, who is fulfilling. And, like when I became a therapist, I remember my first week as an intern seeing clients. And I remember having this moment where I was like, I'm spending all day giving to people and giving
Mm.
advice and being there for people. I really got to look at who of my friends give back to me. And I really went through my friends, and like, there's one person I'm thinking of in particular who is a lovely person. She's a sweet, wonderful person. But my criteria for friendship was, would I ask this person for advice? Do I respect how they're living their life? Are they someone who I can trust and who will share? Like if I share something that is confidential, will they keep it confidential and not gossip?
Mm.
And it really made me reevaluate. What I did was, for the people who didn't meet that criteria but were good people, they kind of got demoted to acquaintance. Where if I was having a party, which I did more of in my 20s than I do at this age, but then I would invite those people because they're lovely people. But the people who I spent time with on the phone, who I went out to lunch with and dinners and really confided in, were the ones that met that criteria.
And that's hard. And I think and tell me if I'm right or wrong here, as you get older, you do weed out those people that are not in the camp of supporting you. And sometimes I look around and I see all these people with all of these friends, and I'm like, that's just not me. I've weeded them out at this point in my life because I have had those toxic situations, whether it's during the holidays or not. And it's just part of how I stay healthy now. And I want people to understand that as we talk about this today, that this is about taking care of yourself all the time. Not just, it may start in the holidays because that's when maybe you need to put your foot down, but it should continue throughout your life.
And I think that, I think that kind of the question underneath that is sort of, how do people evolve to that point? Do people just naturally evolve to the point where as they get older, they're better able to kind of weed out friends? And I think that the only way we do that is if we're working on ourselves. If we're in therapy, or if we're reading self-help books, if we are getting counseling or coaching of some kind. And I think that my philosophy is that we have an important obligation to ourselves, and if we're in a relationship, to our partner, to be constantly evolving and becoming better versions of ourselves. And I think it's really important, if you're someone who's listening to this and going, well, I don't think I could do that, or I don't have the strength to do that, or I'm scared to do that, that's okay. But then you need to make sure that you get the support or the therapy that you need to figure out, why are you not able to do that? Why are you putting other needs before yours? Is that something that's historical from your family? Is that something that's societal? And how do you break that so you can be happier and live a more fulfilling life?
Right. And as you said, it's easier said than done, but you have to be working on yourself. And I have found that the people that I surround myself with are people that do want to work on themselves. And, it's nice to see my daughters growing up and being more self-aware and getting rid of those toxic relationships because they know it doesn't serve them well. Do you find that the younger generation, let's just go to millennials, for example, are taking better care of themselves and have set up more boundaries overall as a generation versus yours or mine?
I do. I think that they are a generation, at least from what I'm seeing, they're a generation that's growing up with the vocabulary, even like our generation, we didn't know, like the word boundaries wasn't used that
No.
way, or, self-care was not a thing. Like, but this is a generation that's growing up with the vocabulary that really helps them to identify it, and B, change it. My kids are having conversations with their friends that are so evolved and so amazing that it's really incredible when it comes to boundaries.
Right. And I think, that's what we've been talking about most of the time, and self-care. So let's just say somebody's not ready to put up those boundaries because maybe they haven't been working on themselves, but something is hitting them this year. They're like, I don't want to go to Aunt Jane's house. I don't want to go to grandma's house. I don't want to see my mother or father, whatever it could be. How do they start taking the steps? Like, if this is so foreign to them, but they don't want to go, and anybody who's listening right now, I'm sure there are people listening right now. They're like, yes, that's me. I don't want to go there. What can they do?
Well, I think, look, I think sometimes you can tell a lie. I think sometimes you can say, I'm sick, I'm so sorry, I can't come, when what you really want to say is, I'm so tired of you coming at me and having an aggressive, argumentative dinner. I'm not up for that this year. I don't think you have to always say that. I don't think you always have to share your inner process. I think sometimes there's this idea, and I do believe in being fearlessly authentic, but sometimes there are people who are not, it's not to your benefit. Sometimes it's better. Being fearlessly authentic sometimes is saying, hey, I'm so sorry, but I'm not feeling well. I'm not going to be able to come tonight, and stay home and like put on your favorite holiday show and curl up with some fuzzy socks and a pint of ice cream and have some fun. But like sometimes people who are really difficult or really aggressive or really argumentative or who just don't get us, sometimes they aren't worthy of the information that of our whole process of how we evolved to this decision.
Can you explain that more? Because I think the people that we do have a hard time communicating with, who are not self-aware, self-evolve, not working on them, those are the people that suddenly somebody who, again, maybe isn't working on themselves, but it's very hard to have that conversation. It's like an apple talking to an orange about how they're feeling, and the orange doesn't understand the apple, right?
Yeah.
I have people in my life like that.
Yeah. And when you have people who, if you said, hey, that dinner was just too argumentative and I don't want that energy this year, that they're going to be like, no, it wasn't, or, well, it's your fault, or, you started it, or, well, I think it's important that you hear my truth or my opinion, or like where they just get aggressive and argumentative about it. Those are not people you can have the conversation with. And sometimes in the interest of self-care, the best thing to do is to just say, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm not gonna be able to make it. I'm not feeling well. I've got the flu or whatever.
What about the people who are single? You mentioned that before. So there are a lot of single people out there going through the holidays. Maybe they were single last year, they're single this year, and they think to themselves, because there's so much pressure at the end of the year to look back and say, well, I did this and this and this, and I'm in a relationship, I have a new job, I'm moving someplace else, and they don't. How, and they feel depressed because they don't feel like they're coming, and they see everybody around them, they're comparing themselves, unfortunately, but that's what happens a lot of times. How do you deal with those emotions? Where do you put those feelings?
Well, a few things. I think that, first of all, I think there's a tendency, we as human beings, we tend to compare our insides to other people's outsides, as they say in AA. And I think that you don't really know what anyone is going through. One thing I know as a therapist, because I see people's inner world. I see people's relationships on a level that most people don't. And, I remember one time I was in my office and a client was talking about this celebrity and saying, she has the perfect life. And I just wish that my life was like hers. And, she has the perfect hair and the perfect body and the perfect life and the perfect relationship and everything. Unbeknownst to her, that celebrity was a client of mine at the time and was coming in depressed and agonizing over her relationship and that her boyfriend had cheated on her and nobody knew. And I think that we have to be really careful. I call it the myth of the perfect life, that we have this idea that other people have a perfect life and our life has all these shitty things going on.
Right.
But the truth is, like, when you look at another relationship, you're making an assumption. Oh, that couple's happy. Oh, that couple has a great sex life. Oh, that couple has a beautiful home. Oh, that couple has everything. And you just don't know. So I caution people not to compare their insides to other people's outsides and to really focus instead on your own process and to look at, if you are someone who is single and you don't want to be, to say, okay, like, especially with the new year coming, and I don't like to be too New Year's resolution-ish, but I do believe in fresh starts and fresh views on our lives and new ways of approaching things. And I think that the thing to do is to look at, okay, what do I really want? What am I looking for in a partner? I really love that 3-part list. What are the deal breakers? What are the must-haves? And what are the, wow, if my future partner had this, what a bonus. That would be amazing. Like,
Oh, I like that one.
It wouldn't be a deal breaker if they didn't have it, but that sure would be amazing. And I think that the reason why that list is so valuable is that it helps you recognize the person when you see them. And most of the clients, as kind of woo-woo as it sounds, most of the clients who I've seen, once they do the list, find someone within a year, because they're so focused on knowing who that person is and prioritizing that. And then the other part of it is to look at, where am I not doing the footwork when it comes to meeting someone? And I think most people at this day and age are on the apps. I think that's kind of a given for most people. But I view dating as a pie. And you want to look at each slice of the pie should be a different perspective. So maybe one is asking friends to set you up on a blind date. One might be going to activities where you're likely to meet someone with similar values. Another might be sports activities. Another might be a singles function at your temple or church or someplace else. Like, so you really want to look at, what are the different ways I can approach this? Because look, they say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If you're only doing one app, doing the same thing and not meeting someone, then you want to really vary your approach. If this were a business, you wouldn't continue operating your business the same way if you weren't getting results. You would come up with different ways of approaching your business. So you want to do that with your dating life as well.
I recently heard somebody talk about marriage as a business. And I think I've heard you refer to it in that way, not in like an unemotional way, but in comparing, quote unquote, comparing it to a business. Would you stay with a business partner that treated you with no respect? Or in being single and looking for somebody, the same thing? Would you keep running ads on your business if you weren't getting anybody answering it? No, you're going to look someplace else.
Yeah.
And I think that's really great advice, because I think so many people feel desperate. And they come to the end of the year and they're like, oh, this has got to be the year that I meet somebody. Well, what are you doing differently this year than you did this past year? What are you going to do? And I think getting very specific, I love that. That's journaling, where so many people don't want to face their feelings.
Yeah.
I know sometimes I don't.
And also, even like on the apps, find 3 to 6 people of the gender you're hoping to date, have them look at your profile and ask them for advice. How am I coming off? What could I be doing differently? What do you think of these pictures? should I change any of them? What do you think about my bio? What if you didn't know me and you read this, what would you think that I was selling? Because look, we're selling ourselves. Like
Right.
that's part of what we're doing if you're on the apps. So I think you want to get some unbiased opinion from people who will be honest with you, not people who be like, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great, you'll meet someone, oh, it's just a perfect app post, like whatever, but it's important to get honest feedback, because sometimes we think we're conveying something and someone who really knows us will look at it and be like, no, you just look like the hot girl, you don't look like you're the person who reads all of the great literature, and that's something that is
Right.
really important to you. Like, you need to show, let's do a picture of you with a book so you can find someone who loves reading too. Like, it's a kind of a basic example, but you want to make sure that you're attracting what you're really looking for.
That's great advice. And that's something to give people something concrete to think about, to get excited about the new year.
Yeah.
We are going to take a quick break. So stay with us with Dr. Jenn Mann. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Fearlessly Authentic, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Jenn Mann, and we are talking about how to manage your anxiety, your stressful moments during the holiday seasons, and really throughout the whole year. So when you do get to the holiday season, you're ready for it and you know how to handle it, manage it, so you are the healthiest. So, Dr. Jenn Mann, thank you for being here today during this busy time of year.
My pleasure.
We talked a lot about the stress and anxiety. And then one of the things that you and I discussed we wanted to talk about today was emotional eating during the holiday season. That is something, for somebody who's been in the fitness industry for, I don't know, 34, 35 years now, obviously that's something that comes up when I'm training somebody and they all decide that, you know what, it's December 1st. No, I'm sorry, it's Thanksgiving. I am going to just eat whatever I want. And you know what, when they say that, you just say, okay, but be aware. Because if a lot of people look at the holiday season and say, it's my time to indulge. And what is that thought process? It's time to indulge. Why do we all think that we should eat whatever we want? We should eat lots of cookies. I kind of want to talk about that for a second.
Well, to me, it's a few things. And I come from an intuitive eating model. I have an app called No More Diets. It's all about how to eat whatever you want, but also really listen to your body and honor your body and pay attention to how the food affects your body, affects your mood, affects you in every way. To me, when people say, I'm going to eat whatever I want in the holidays, a lot of the time it's a sign that they are depriving themselves so much and they're in such a deprivational model that they get really bingy around the holidays. And to me, it's a reflection of an unhealthy relationship with food. And I'm very much of the belief that if we're really paying attention to our body, if we're really paying attention to our body and we're listening to our hunger cues and we're stopping when we're satisfied, not stuffed, that we tend to get to our natural weight. And I'm a big fan of the hunger scale, which is a scale from 0 to 10, 5 being neutral. And what you want to do is you want to eat when you're a 3, which is solidly hungry. If you're a 4, you're like, I'm not sure if I'm hungry. I think I might be, but I'm not sure. Okay, well, wait till you know if you're hungry. And not letting yourself get hungrier than a 3. If you let yourself get to a 2, your stomach is grumbling, you're not feeling so good, your energy's not good. You let yourself get to a 1 and you're feeling dizzy, you're feeling like nauseous, you're not
your blood sugar has totally dropped. Yeah,
exactly. And then on the other side of it is after that 5, which is neutral, when you get to a 6 is, I can tell I've eaten something, but I'm not full. A 7 is full, an 8 is stuffed, a 9 is I'm in pain, and a 10 is I can't even stand up. And I'm a big fan of really working on eating when you're a 3, because you're solidly hungry. That also means you're satisfying something. Because if you are not hungry and satisfying hunger, it's hard to know when to stop. Because there's no mechanism that says, okay, you're full, it's time to stop because you weren't hungry to begin with. And then you want to stop when you're a 5 or a 6. I always think of it as I want to be able to run down the street without feeling so stuffed and so uncomfortable. And that's kind of a good zone to be in. Once you get into that zone of that like 8 where you're so full it doesn't feel good, or 9 you're in pain, you've overeaten, and it's a sign that you've given your body more food than it wants. And if you want to know what your natural weight is, then you want to be eating what your body tells you it wants. And sometimes people will say, well, my body tells me it wants cookies and nothing else. But the truth is that typically at the beginning of the process where you're, as we call it in the business, legalizing foods, where you start eating foods that you maybe didn't allow yourself or you were out of control with, you do start out overeating with those foods until you realize that, oh, I can have this at any time. Like I had an eating disorder from age 11 to 21, and then I discovered intuitive eating, and which is why I'm so passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
And ice cream was my favorite food. I couldn't have it in the house because if I did, I would overeat it. I had to eat an awful lot of ice cream in order to realize I'm not going to deprive myself of that. I'm going to always have that in the house. Now I have ice cream in my refrigerator that has freezer burn because I know I can always have it.
Isn't that interesting? And, when I was growing up, this is a very funny story. I was in like 6th grade, and one of my friends came over and she said, you guys have so much food here, because my mom went to like Pepperidge Farm, and she had all this food. And back then you put that stuff in your freezer, you buy it when it's on sale, and then she would defrost it anyway. But it was like ho-hos, all Hostess cupcakes, all those things. And she was like, you guys have so much food here. And, I never ate it because it was always there. However, she didn't have it. And she grew up with an eating disorder because in her house, everything had to be so healthy. So there was no balance.
Yeah.
And I mean, now she's fine, but she had to work through that balance. It was very hard.
That's what the studies show. I mean, what you're saying is exactly true. The studies show that the more we deprive ourselves of food, those specific foods, the more we tend to be out of control when we encounter them.
Right.
And now, look, I am someone who I've got 30 plus years of recovery on me, and I am vegan. I don't eat anything that has a face or came from something that has a face.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it is an ethical choice, but it's not a deprivational choice. I love ice cream, so I have the vegan version of it. I love cookies, so I have the vegan version of it. There's no deprivation in that model for me. And I also really pay attention. I love fruits and vegetables. I love whole grain foods. And I'm very aware also of making sure that I eat foods that make my body feel good. If I'm getting on the treadmill and I have a bunch of cookies and some vegan milk, that may be delicious and I may enjoy it, but I'm probably not going to have a good run, and I'm probably not going to feel great and have a lot of energy. Do I have the cookies and the vegan milk? Yes, absolutely. I love that stuff, but I'm also mindful about it. And I really pay attention. Am I having this because it's in front of me, or am I having this because I really want this? And sometimes we just get visually cued by things, especially around the holidays. And I think there's a sense of holiday scarcity because we go, oh, a gingerbread house. I can never have that any other time of the year.
Right.
And
yes.
we have to change that. You know what? You can make that. You can get the recipe. You can order it. And I think that allowing ourselves to have those foods year round, that can really help a lot of that sort of scarcity eating that tends to happen around the holidays.
I never thought of that, for the person who's indulging because they think I could only have this time of year. Just like Thanksgiving, people have to eat so much because they say, I only eat this type of food on Thanksgiving.
Yeah. But you can have it anytime.
Okay. So let's just say somebody who is in that deprivation mindset. Let's just take a woman, okay, because we're both women, and she's mindful of her diet and mindful of how she wants to feel in her body. And for the most part, eats healthy, but now is her time to go. She's just going to say, screw the diet, whatever that diet is, quote unquote diet. How can she wrap her head around that scarcity mindset? How can she go in there with a different mindset, thinking, look, I can have this stuff all year? How does somebody change their mindset this time of year?
Well, I think a few things. I think when you are at, a lot of the time, these meals are kind of buffet kind of meals, or else there's just a lot of food on the table and you can take things and put it on your plate. Take a little bit of everything and put it on your plate. Taste everything and see what you really like. Then you can get rid of the plate and just get the things you like. That way you're not eating just because it's on your plate. You're not eating because, like, oh, I always have eaten a lot of mashed potatoes, and maybe you don't really like it. And I think that it's really important that there's a tendency, especially in the holidays and especially at a family meal, to just shovel food into our mouth without tasting it. And I really, as part of the intuitive eating process, I really encourage people to taste their food, to savor their food, to enjoy their food. So often I speak with people who have eating issues, who say, I love food. But when I really ask, they're not tasting food, especially if they're eating food they feel guilty about. Stop and taste it. Don't stand and eat it as you're talking to someone, or watching TV because you think somehow it doesn't count, or, don't be mindless in your eating. Enjoy it. Eat with gusto, eat with passion, eat with enjoyment. Savor every bite. Notice where on your tongue do you taste the sensations. Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it salty? Like, how does it feel in your mouth? What is the texture like? Take the time to really taste it and savor it and enjoy it, because that changes your relationship with food. And when you're mindful, it's a lot harder to overeat when you're really mindful.
100%. I've been talking about this for so many years, the mindfully eating. And it's hard for us to do, but anything that's hard is going to help you be, improve on what it is that you want to improve on. I want to go back to what you were talking about, the intuitive eating and the scale that you have in your mind.
Yeah.
So if somebody is eating empty calories, just say like high in fat, high in sugar, what do you suggest for those people who are hungry at 3 and go all the way up to the 8, feeling sick to their stomach, and it's bankrupt of any type of nutrients?
Well, if you're eating and then it's making you feel sick, then you really need to reevaluate what you're eating. And I know that may sound like obvious, like, oh, duh, like, of course. But I think you also have to look at your relationship with food, because sometimes we just judge the food as like good or bad. And that kind of black and white thinking is very bad for our relationship with food. And I think that you want to ask yourself, okay, if I'm eating the same thing at 3 o'clock and I'm feeling sick and I'm not feeling good, what is it about that food that's making me gravitate towards it? Does it have emotional meaning? Is it my mom used to always make those cookies and my mom is no longer here at the holidays and I miss my mom, so I'm eating those cookies? Is it, oh, I think that this is a treat I'm giving myself, except that treat is hurting you? Like, I think you have to really kind of do a deep dive into what is it in your relationship with food that's making you choose a food that's making you not feel good. And sometimes that requires therapy. Sometimes we can't get to the answer alone. Sometimes it means reaching out to someone with some expertise in that area to help us figure out why we're making a choice that's hurting us.
And more than likely, that relationship with food is being triggered by something else. And that's where you need to get to the bottom line.
And food's very symbolic. Food is about
Yes.
nurturing. It's about comforting. I mean, look, our first relationship with food is being fed, usually by a mom, sometimes a dad, but on the breast or with a bottle. And it's comfort and it's being held and it's feeling safe. And so our relationship with food is incredibly complicated. And we have a lot of ideas, especially around the holidays, about the meaning and the history and the memories and kind of the specialness of holiday food. And I think that gets very complicated.
Right. I was just thinking for a second, I don't cook a lot. I'm not a good cook, but I make really good latkes, potato pancakes during Hanukkah time.
Yeah.
It's like the only thing I really know how to make. And I used to feel that when my parents were both around, that I needed to eat a lot to make my mother happy. I never had an unhealthy relationship with food, but I remember that feeling. And then as they got older and I was doing it for my family, I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to take one forkful to say I had the potato pancake for Hanukkah and I'm done.
Yeah.
But that's not always easy for everybody else. So if somebody is going to a party, let's just, again, what can they do? I usually suggest they eat before they go. Eat something healthy before you go so you're not hungry. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it's important for people to be able to participate in the holiday festivities.
Right.
And I don't like anyone going into any meal or any event too hungry. We should never be too
Right.
hungry, too angry, too tired if we can
Right.
avoid it. So I think that sometimes having a little snack before you go in so you're not over hungry and making erratic choices because your blood sugar is so low. But I
Right.
think it's important to be able to participate in that holiday stuff and to be mindful and to try a little bit of everything to figure out what do you really like. They say that our stomach is like as big as our fist, and like
Mhm.
we don't have that much room. So you want to make sure you're selective about what you have, because that's treating yourself well, giving yourself the food that gives you the most pleasure, the most enjoyment, that makes you feel good when you walk away from the meal is
Mhm.
really what's ideal.
Something came up when you were saying this, the feeling of having self-compassion.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that and relationships with food. And I think overall, with everything that we're talking about, I think so many of us are hard on ourselves for saying, well, just suck it up and go to Aunt Jane's house, or just suck it up and eat the food, whatever it could be. How do we sit back and give ourselves that self-compassion, that love?
Well, I think a really good example of an area where people around the holidays, especially, but in general, don't have compassion for themselves is when they have a binge, when they
Mm,
overeat. That there's a tendency to say, oh, I have that kind of black and white diet mentality, thinking I blew it, I fucked up, so now I'm just going to eat everything. Or the next day to be like, now I'm going to starve because I need to punish myself or make up for the calories. And that's actually the worst thing that you can do.
thank you.
And I am a big believer in instead looking at, okay, what happened that I treated my body that way? What was going on emotionally? Was I turning to food for comfort? Was I feeling anxious? Was I feeling angry? What was I using food to accomplish? And how can I nurture myself better in ways other than food? Because to me, it's a red flag. When we are overeating, it's a red flag something's wrong.
Right.
And we need to pay attention to those red flags and to actually be able to utilize them and use them to help make ourselves better, help ourselves heal, help ourselves make healthier decisions, and just help ourselves overall. So to me, the next day, the answer is not to starve yourself. The answer is to evaluate what went wrong and why that happened. And also to then wait until you're physically hungry. Wait till you're a 3 on that hunger scale we talked about
Mhm.
before eating your first meal, because then you set yourself up to succeed in terms of there is a hunger to satiate. There's something built in our bodies to help us to know when it's time to stop eating, when we eat when we're hungry.
And I think that from what you're saying, that everybody needs to understand that there's no right or wrong. It's what works for you. And we're here talking about how you can be the healthiest, how you can love yourself more, how you can set up boundaries, how you can have that self-compassion. Because I know so many people do, they'll beat themselves up the next day. I'm horrible, I'm a crappy person, and starve themselves for maybe a day or two, get on the cardio and and I hate to see that.
Yeah, and being punitive doesn't help. It makes you feel worse
Right,
and makes it more likely that you're going to binge.
right, right. Let's go on to what I mentioned at the beginning. You and I have both had a loss, and I'm so sorry for your loss this year.
Thank you. And you too.
When, thank you. When we are in the holiday season, and of course, those memories of our loved ones come up, how do you best suggest somebody copes with that?
Well, a few things. I think depending on where you are in your grieving process, whether it's a new death or something that you have been dealing with for years or decades, even, I think that you may be at a different stage in your grief and loss. I think first of all, it's important to understand the stages of grief and loss. There's a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross who studied death and dying, and what she talked about is that we go through these somewhat predictable stages of grief and loss: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. They don't necessarily happen in that order. And you don't graduate from one and get to check it off and be like, oh, I'm all done with anger. I'm never going to feel that again. I wish. But instead, sometimes we alternate between anger and sadness. Sometimes we alternate between denial and acceptance. And I think that being aware and understanding what those stages look like is an important part of grieving and understanding your process. I think we have to have patience with our grieving. I also think it's really important to get support, whether it is a grief and loss group, whether it is reading a book. I'm a huge fan of Rabbi Stephen Leader has written a number of books about death and dying that no matter what your religion, it is, his books are absolutely phenomenal. I also think that reaching out to other people who have experienced those losses, really looking at who in your social circle and your family can be there to support you. I think those things are really important. And also finding ways to honor the legacy of the person who passed away. How do you keep them alive in a positive way? I think that's important.
Yeah, it is. It's always very hard. I want to move over to your book, The Relationship Fix. And, if you could, we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
If you could just provide for everybody a brief overview of what you discuss in the book. And I think it's so appropriate, especially this time of year, to make sure that you're tuned into your relationships, your personal, meaningful relationships.
And this is a very easy time of year to neglect your relationship with
Right.
gift buying and the kids and the trees and the like all of that stuff. There's a lot to do at home and oftentimes for families and friends and all of that. My book, The Relationship Fix, I wrote it when I was doing my show VH1 Couples Therapy with Dr. Jenn. I had so many people who were reaching out to me saying, I want couples therapy with you. And, I wasn't able to accommodate all of these people, but I thought, you know what, I've got to write a book that couples can read that's the equivalent of like a year and a half of therapy with me. So I wrote
It's
The
such a good
Relationship.
book. I've given my copies off to everybody.
Thank you. And I really wanted the book to be a combination of actual research and studies about relationships, my clinical experience, and also examples from people on my shows and on my radio show so that people could really understand what it looks like in action. The book really talks about 6 different categories. It talks about communication, it talks about negotiation, it talks about family trauma and how it affects your current relationships. It talks about sex, it talks about forgiveness and how to make amends. And I think it's a really important book because no matter where you are as a couple, even if you're having a great relationship, there are always things that you can learn to do better. Oh, and also sex. How can I forget about sex? how to invigorate a sex life. And I think that no matter where you are in your relationship, there are always tips and tools that you can read about that you can implement in your relationship to make it stronger. And I'm a big believer as a writer in giving readers actual tools that they can utilize at home, because you can get all the information and walk away from a book and go, well, that was really interesting and what great concepts. But if you don't know how to implement it in your relationship and in your life, it hasn't helped you. And I always like my books to be able to help.
Like I said, I love the book. For everybody listening, you need to go out and buy the book, buy it for somebody you love, buy it for yourself. It is just a wonderful book. And you've given us so much information today to help us stay healthy through the holiday season and hopefully throughout the year. And for those of us who can, implement those, it's very, very important. Do you have any last words as we tie up this whole episode on some final words that you can leave the listener to, just so it sticks in their head about how to manage a sticky situation? With everything that we've talked, whether it's eating, the stress, the anxiety, just, a tip or two.
I think that if someone really cares about you, they want what's best for you. And if they don't, then you still need to do what is best for you. You have to prioritize your own self-care and not get sucked into other people's demands on you, and make sure that you're taking good care of yourself. Without that, you've got nothing.
So good. So good. Dr. Jenn Mann, where can we reach you?
You can find me on social media at Dr. Jenn Mann, DrJennMann. So 2 N's on Jen, 2 N's on Mann. And of course, on my website, Dr. Jenn, spelled out DoctorJenn.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much, and have a wonderful holiday. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for all the great advice.
My pleasure. You too.
And until next week, everyone, go and live your most fearlessly authentic life. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And remember, you can find me also, this is brand new, on Amazon Music. So look for Fearlessly Authentic on Amazon Music starting just 2 days ago. So that's very exciting.
Congrats.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. See you next week.